Okay, now that we've gone through some Phillips curve stuff and looked at SRAS or short run supply, this is going to be an FRQ that actually starts in a recession. So you always got to be on your toes with College Board because they can take any lesson and kind of tweak it to fit, some kind of scenario. So jump into the 2016 FRQ with the Phillips curve in a recession. It doesn't tell you it's a recession. We're going to figure that out as we go. But let's start with our question. Okay. Assume the U.S. economy is currently in a short-run equilibrium with actual unemployment above the natural rate. So actual and natural. You've seen this a couple times in the last couple of lessons. You just have to understand the same formula. Actual unemployment versus natural. So if we have more actual unemployment or it's above the natural rate, that means we have a recession. Okay? Because remember, the actual rate is our natural rate of unemployment plus cyclical. Okay, that was really horrible. Cyclical. All right, so that is going to exceed. So that means more people are not working because the business cycle is in a downturn. Remember that right there? We have that downturn, we have cyclical unemployment. So the natural rate, we're always going to have structural and frictional unemployment. When you add in cyclical, you get this actual rate. So if the actual is above the natural rate, that means we have a recession, okay? Now, they ask you, draw a single correctly labeled graph with the long-run Phillips curve and the short-run Phillips curve. Label short-run equilibrium at point P. Now, when you answer FRQs, remember you got to structure your answers just like they are up here. Make it nice and neat, more readable for the grader, okay? So I got 1 and A, and this is really big because I'm using a marker because it's easier to see on a video, but when you do a pen, it won't be this big and ugly and clumsy, okay? So now I'm going to draw my long-run Phillips curve and the short-run Phillips curve. Got my unemployment and inflation rate. I'm just going to put IR just because they have it on the answer key. And they have an IR percentage. I know I use pi all the time, but most people would take that. So, okay, that's what the real answer key looks like right there. All right, so they want current short-run equilibrium as point P. Well, we know we're in a recession, right? So this is our NRU, or you can put UN, but they didn't tell you to label it, so you don't have to. They said label it as point P, okay? Now, it said labeled with both long-run Phillips curve, short-run, and equilibrium as P. So, do what they say, you get points. I just do extra because it helps me see and visualize. All right, so we're going to put our point right here of P. Now, that is a good spot for it because look, here's our natural rate. Here's how much unemployment we have. It's to the right. Remember, increase right, decrease left. So that part, our rate of unemployment right now is further. And they didn't give you numbers like 4%, 6%, or whatever, so just go with what it says right there. Okay, now, assuming no policy actions are taken, will the short-run Phillips curve shift to the right, shift to the left, or remain the same in the long run? Explain. Okay, now, let me focus in a little bit on the question so you can see it a little bit better. They actually told you, will the Phillips curve shift? So remember, if it shifts, that is SRAS. Okay? If it is a movement, it would be an aggregate demand thing. So what they're asking is, what's going to happen in the long run? Well, we have to think to ourselves, okay, long run, no policy action. People are out of work. So in the long run, with no policy action, we've got to think about the big economy. And I like to sketch over to the side to help me remember. Okay, I know that I'm going to have my SRAS, aggregate demand, okay? And I'm not going to label everything because I'm just thinking right now. It's a recession, isn't it? So I'm going to look over there. Okay, they're crossing to the left. I'm going to have my recession. That will be my long-run aggregate supply. Now, anything that's going to happen here is we need to get back to full employment. So during a recession, people will either take wage cuts or they will go find a job that is less paying than the one they had, just because they need to. Now, when that happens, businesses can pay lower wages during a recession. And since that's an input cost, remember PIG, productivity, inflationary expectations. Oh wait, it's right there. Input cost and government action. So input costs are wages. That's something you put in your product, right? Materials and labor. So in a recession, supply can shift to the right and get back to equilibrium. Okay. Now that gets us back to full employment. So looking back at our question, assuming no policy action was taken. So that's what I got to think about with no policy action, because policy is done by the Federal Reserve, monetary policy, or the government, fiscal policy, taxes and consumption, okay, or taxes and government spending. So now all of a sudden they also said no policy action is going to shift right, left, or upward. So I know that when short-run supply shifts to the right, that the mirror image of the Phillips curve is going to shift to the left. Okay, it does the opposite, the mirror. Okay, so I'm going to go back over here. Let me grab a different color so maybe that'll help you see. Now I have my new spot where, and they only asked, okay? They didn't tell me to draw it on the graph. Isn't that crazy? So that's kind of tricky right there. It just says, assuming it, will it shift right, left, or stay the same in the long run? So now we have part B. Just had to do some problem solving. So it's going to shift left. And my explanation now, so you get 1 point percent, it shifts to the left, that producing at a level of output below full employment will create higher unemployment and lower inflationary expectations, and that has, lower wages, lower input costs, any of those things, okay? Because, and don't abbreviate when you write a real FRQ, because of, lower inflationary expectations, input cost, wages, okay? If you explain, then you got your 2 points. So I get a point right there, and I get a point right there, all right? You would have got 2 points for drawing your graph and adding the P on there as your label. All right, so at the end, this thing looks ugly, but if you just go step by step, you should be okay. All right, now, so we've knocked out A, we've knocked out B. If the Federal Reserve Bank wants to lower unemployment, what expansionary open market operation should it be? Look, got my green marker already. So, expansionary, okay? Then open market operation, that is bonds. Always think bonds. And if something's going to expand, it's going to get bigger, isn't it? So what is our thing? We want to buy bonds and make big bucks. So I want to buy bonds equals big bucks. All right, so when I buy bonds, make big bucks, what does that do? That makes the money supply increase. So once again, if you need that help, just that visual, I gotta think, okay, got money demand, money supply, the real interest rate, oh, sorry, that's the nominal interest rate. Okay, that's an I with a percent like this, because that's in the money supply. The money market is for the nominal interest rate, okay? So now, if the money supply is getting bigger, if I'm trying to buy bonds, make bigger bucks, so the Federal Reserve Bank is going to buy the bonds from the bank with cash. Now all of a sudden there's more money out in the money supply. So that's going to make this shift to the right, isn't it? So when that happens, my current level of interest rate actually is going to decrease. So I know that the money supply increasing gives me lower interest. Then things like interest-sensitive consumption, that's getting a loan to buy something, would increase. And when investment, Sig X, goes up, that's good for aggregate demand to go up, isn't it? Oh, that looks like ADT. All right, so that makes aggregate demand go up. I know I talk fast, I'm sorry, but I like short videos, and you can pause them and kind of rethink some of this stuff. So now, we're in part C. If they want an expansionary policy, what should it use? Okay, they should buy bonds. God, man, my handwriting is terrible today. All right, too much coffee, I'm jittery. All right, so they need to buy bonds. It doesn't say explain. Think command words. If it doesn't say explain, you don't have to explain. All right, good. Now, part D. How will the open market operation you identified in part C affect each of the following? The Fed funds rate and explain. Okay, so now I'm going to just draw it like they asked me to, D and I. So what is that going to do to the Fed funds rate? Okay, well, the Fed funds rate is the rate at which banks borrow money from each other. So it's still a loan rate. Okay, so over here I know interest rates are decreasing. Well, the Fed funds rate is going to decrease. Now, the Fed funds rate will decrease, and they want, here's that magic word again, explain. If you see explain, show, illustrate, graph, those mean points. Okay, so now all of a sudden the Fed funds rate is going to decrease because if the money supply increases, then that's going to make bank reserves get larger, and that's going to decrease the Fed funds rate, because anytime banks have larger amounts, there's more of it, it gets cheaper, right? Okay, so the money supply increases, and that's going to make the Fed funds decrease. Okay, now you can word that out a little better, but like I said, I'm being short and quick, and if you gave this to me and I graded it, I would take that as a correct answer. Okay, now next thing they're asking about, what is going to happen to the real interest rate in the short run? Now, the real interest rate in the short run, remember the real interest rate is equal to I minus pi. So I know if this one is going to decrease, then the real interest rate is going to decrease, okay? Because the inflation rate remained the same. So I know the real interest rate is going to decrease in the short run. And you don't have to explain it. If you just know that interest rates are going down because you thought in your head about buying bonds, then you're good, okay? So just keep that formula in mind, and this is actually a correct answer. So you get 2 points, you get 1 point for this whole thing being right, and you get 1 point for this thing being right. Okay, so the next thing they ask that's still in our realm is going to be, what happens, given your answer in part D, II, or D2, II, Captain, what is the effect on real GDP in the short run? Explain. Well, you've already kind of graphed this whole thing out in your head, haven't you? Okay, well, at least I hope you have at this point. So, if people are going to invest and there's low interest rates, then that is going to, hold on, sorry, got it right here. All right, they're asking about real GDP. GDPR. At low interest rates, guess what? It's going to increase, isn't it? It's going to increase. And if you're saying the real interest rate being lower will lead to investment increasing, okay? That's kind of macro language for explaining all that. And of course, what does that lead to? Aggregate demand going up. And if you shift aggregate demand to the right, well, that's supply going up. But if you shift aggregate demand going up, that leads to GDP going up because people are making stuff. People want stuff, okay? All right, that ends up being a 13-minute video, which I didn't want to do. But if you understood all that, you can work through something like this, you are almost done. You are at the hardest stuff of the class, and you're doing great. If not, practice this again. Message me in Canvas. All right.